Hello, this is Professor Stephen Shwiff from the Columbia Gorge Community College, and I'll be talking about writing tips generally for history papers and for specifically my response paper assignments. You can apply most of these pieces of advice or tips to any historical papers that you write. Even books are written along some of the same structures and some of the same guidelines. So as you listen to this and look over the hard copy that you can get either from Moodle on the online classes or in-class handouts, consider this advice and what the paper states. Now, this is a structure of well-written papers generally. In history, you want to have a thesis. You want to have a hypothesis. You want to tell the reader what you're thinking and what you're going to prove in your paper. Now, this can be any kind of idea that you get from the information that you learn in class, and that is why it's such a good teaching and learning tool, because you have to come up with some kind of theory, some kind of idea, and you have to prove it through the evidence and the information that you receive. So generally, in the first paragraph, you want to give a little bit of an introduction on what your topic is, what era of history you're talking about, where in the world you're talking about, or the universe, if it's broader than just this world. And you want to state your thesis at that point, so that people can look back and figure out what you're talking about and where you're going with your ideas. Generally, then you get to the body of the paper, and you want to have your points of data and your analysis of that data, all with the eye still looking to your thesis to prove your ultimate point, your ultimate hypothesis. So in these response papers, they're generally a page and a half, 2 pages long. You want to get very quickly to the data, to the analysis, and generally you want to at least have a couple, 2 to 3 of these points. So you do point 1 in your first paragraph of your body in analysis, you go to point 2 on your next paragraph in analysis, and you go to point 3, your data and analysis in that third paragraph. That should be enough for a response paper, for a short paper. If you're writing a research paper, you may have a lot longer. These points, point 1 may take, if you're writing a 7 to 10 page paper, which is what is generally assigned in our college, you may spend 2.5 on the point 1, you may spend 2.5 on point 2, and you may spend 2.5 pages on point 3. It just expands with the more you look at. If you look at the textbook, for example, you'll find that they'll tell you about history, and then they'll give you all this evidence, and they'll try to prove that point, and then they'll move on to the next section. And so all historical writings are in this fashion. So then after the body of your paper and those points are made, then you conclude the paper, and you want to tie all those all those points that you made in the body of your paper back to your thesis, and you want to draw that all back and tie it up in a nice, neat bow of logical, concise reasoning. Now, of course, the better papers have all those facets in them, plus they're compelling, creative, or have some other meritorious contribution. So as you're working on your paper, have an interest in what you're doing and really focus in on the types of assignments and the types of things that you're thinking about and that you're reading, and put in the work to do a good job. Now, for our response papers, they will be 1 to 2 page response papers, and they're commenting, not summarizing, the concepts of that week's topic. And you get that topic from the discussions, from the lectures, from any videos that might be watched in class or assigned on the online Moodle. You don't have to go research the topics. You don't have to worry about any of that, because you should have plenty of information from the sources. In fact, you should have plenty of information from any one of those sources. So what I generally advise is you take in the information, you think about it, you process it, you make it your own, you make it your conscious thought, and then you tell me about it. And like I just described in the previous slide, have it organized, along with the thesis and the points. You want to pick something relatively narrow. If you had a 30-page chapter and you try to tell me all about that topic and from that 30-page chapter, you're generally going to need right around 30 pages because the book is telling you what you need to know. So you want to pick something very small and something that struck your interest for some reason, and that you have some thesis, some hypothesis, some idea that you want to express that's unique, hopefully to yourself, and that you're interested in. Now, the response paper schedule is posted in the Moodle, and you have to turn in through Moodle unless it's a in-person class, and then they'll be assigned in class and turned in class. Now, each one will be graded in the following style, and I usually break this down for the first response paper and then still use that same format to grade the rest, but may not break it down into each individual section. But 20 points of the 100 total points is writing style. Using correct grammar, using correct English, capitalizing punctuation, all that good stuff that you learned in your writing class. You should be able to write at a proficient rate for this class. So 20% is writing style, 40% is content. That is the information you're using from all the different sources, how you're interpreting it, how you're thinking about it, and how you're conveying that. So that's the content part. So that's all your data that you're producing and your interpretation of that data. And then 40% is your thesis. Well, let me read it first. Is your illustration of critical and reflective thinking. That's your thesis and how you tie the information to your thesis and how you interpret and work through that information in order to produce a interesting, informative paper. Now, all the papers are graded out of 100%, but the response papers combined are worth 20%, as noted in the syllabus. So if your syllabus says something different, then that's the percentage of what your response papers will be of your grade. Now, here's some general comments and suggestions for writing papers, and I'm going to let you pause the video at any time or use the hard copy to read these over more carefully. I'm just going to comment very briefly on these without reading them verbatim, and you can pause the video or read it, like I said. So first of all, spend the time that's necessary to write a good paper. Nobody can do their papers at the last minute and have them turn out all right. Nobody can cut the work down or do just a little bit of work or try to write it as they read. You have to do the hard work of reading, learning, and then interpreting and writing. And if you don't, it will reflect in your grade, and you'll be missing out on a lot of interesting information. Now, if you see a pitfall ahead, you know you're going to be busy, you know you're going to want to be out on 4th of July weekend, plan ahead. If the class or the online class schedule doesn't mesh with your personal schedule, work ahead, turn in things early, that sort of thing. And always talk to the professor if you have any kind of problem, any kind of conflict. Second, make sure your idea or thesis is clear and explicit. And like I said, put it at the beginning, towards the beginning of your paper. If it's garbled or if it's unclear, then the professor who's grading your paper has no idea of what you're trying to prove. It's also just messy. You want to write a clean, crisp paper, very clear and concise. I'll leave the rest of this for you to read on your own, but you want to keep your personal feelings out of it. You want it to be historical. You want it to be third person. You never include yourself in the paper. You don't say, I think. By writing the paper itself, you're telling me what you think. You're putting your name on the paper, so I know it's all of your opinions and all of your thoughts. Now, if you're getting some opinion from somebody else, you have to footnote it, and we'll see that later on in this sheet, but also hopefully you've learned that in your previous classes, that you always attribute somebody else's thought in the document, and that this is why. If you turn something in with your name, it's supposed to be all your independent thought. Now, of course, you haven't gone to Boston and researched what happened in Salem. You haven't gone to New Orleans to witness Andrew Jackson beating the British. So I don't expect you to footnote everything that, of course, you couldn't have known personally. General information, accepted information, you don't have to footnote. But if you take somebody else's ideas or words, you need to footnote those. Okay. The next part, you must provide evidence, effective evidence, to document your arguments. So read above. Don't just say something and leave it without any kind of evidence. This is, of course, the second part of your analysis or part of your grade. If you say a statement, you want to tie it together with the data. You want to prove it. So if you don't have proof, don't say it. And if you do have proof, say it in a third person type of direct way. If you want to say slavery's bad, you don't say, I think slavery's bad, slavery's horrible. You say, slavery was very difficult or was tragic, had a tragic effect on African American families or women or so forth. And you then go on and explain why. And we'll see examples of this as we go along with the different topics. Now make sure if you attribute something, if you're saying somebody said something, if you're attributing an idea to somebody else, make sure they actually said what you're saying they said. Often when we read through the books, or people will say, repeat something back that they thought I said in class, and I'll say, no, actually, you misinterpreted what I said. It's best to always check. It's best to always think about that. This is a great system in our classes where we have discussion either in person or on message boards, where you can throw your ideas out there and let other people respond and see if you're correct. And make sure that if you're identifying or you're drawing inferences out of somebody else's work, that you identify those and make that clear as well. Next, use reference notes whenever necessary. It's safer to have one than omit one. People's careers have been lost because they did not properly credit the sources of other that they had received stuff from. So if you think, oh, I'm footnoting too much, I'm just going to skip this one, or I don't need a footnote here, think twice about that and just make sure you're doing it correctly. Last on this page, quotations must fit grammatically as well as substantively in the essay, and here's some advice on how you do that. Look up in a style book or in your English textbooks. You should be able to find this type of information. Now, I think that every paper should have a title, something that draws you in, gives you some advice on what you're going to be learning or talking about or reading. This is very similar to having that clear, concise thesis. You don't want to fool anybody. You don't want somebody reading your paper thinking, oh, it's about one thing and it's really about another. And you don't want to have some kind of term paper one type of title. You want to have something that expresses what you're trying to see. If you saw on the TV guide that there's a show called Show 1, you wouldn't be too interested. But if it's called Modern Family, you would say, oh, well, that seems to have a couple of features that I might be interested in, and so I'll try and watch it and see. All right, here's a list of common mistakes to be aware of and to avoid. Hopefully they're all clear to you. I'm not going to spend time reading them over. Just try to be as concise and correct in your usage of the English language as possible. The first point, I often get sometimes in my classes a whole paragraph that's one sentence long because there's no periods and restart a sentence, and it's just confusing. So always use simple sentences, and like I said, read over these. These are very important, but pretty clear. Regarding synonyms, use a thesaurus only if you know how to use one properly. They will have words that if you don't, you may make yourself seem like you're less educated than you are. For example, the Miss American pageant winner who was told not to use like, instead use such as. Well, she was using such as to express different forms of like than comparison. And so she seemed very foolish and became an internet joke. And of course, if you haven't seen her, put in Google Miss America's speech on maps, and you probably will come up with her. But I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. Next, remember that you are a historian writing about historical facts, and try to keep your personal feelings, your personal beliefs, what you are personally out of your paper. You don't want to say we when you talk about America. You don't want to say, men always take advantage of women if you're a woman and you want to, protect your gender or whatever. You want to keep those things neutral, because you want your points to be made on the historical facts, the historical evidence that you're trying to express. And that goes on for the next part, but do read it over, of course. This is a very important part. Proofread your paper before handing them in. Even if you're not the one typing them, if you write it out and somebody else types them, make sure you read them over. And don't depend on spell check, because often I'll get, their car couldn't work properly, and their, which should be T-H-E-I-R, is spelled T-H-E-R-E. Both are proper words, but they don't mean the same thing. So make sure you're reading your paper over, and my advice is you read your paper out loud, either to somebody else or to yourself, because in reading out loud you usually catch things that you don't catch when you're just reading it over. And there's even been studies that show a lot of times when you're reading stuff that you'll miss things if you're reading it instead of saying it out loud. Next, this has happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to all of you. If you're working on a computer, back up your work. If you're writing your 7 to 10 page research paper, don't write it on your computer, leave it, and hope that it is there the next time you come. Back it up on a memory card, send it to yourself in email, do whatever you need to do, print it out, and so at least then you could retype it. The other thing is, keep saving your work all during while you're working on it. I remember one time doing a very difficult legal document, and all of a sudden the computer turned off, and it was gone. And I hadn't been saving it each step of the way, and had to redo it from scratch. So make sure you're always backing up your paper, saving it, and always make sure it's turned in properly, and keep a copy. It can be a copy on your computer, on your backup. But once you turn in, even in class, make sure you keep a copy, because if the professor says, I've turned in all the turned back all the papers, you raise your hand and says, where's mine? If it fell out of his briefcase, if his dog ate it, then he's not going to know about it. So you need to make sure you always have a copy, and at the very least, you can show that you had done the work in the proper manner. Well, those are my advice. I'm sure every professor, every student has their own stories, but those are what I would ask you to follow and think about, and this will hopefully lead to the best writing that you can do. Thank you.